Christian Church. If you're on campus today, it's your first day or first couple of Sundays you've been here, I want to say welcome to you. Glad you are here today. If you're watching online for the first time, we're glad that you are joining us. Just real quick, if you're new, Foothills is all about coaching you up in your faith because we believe your faith and it's your journey, and we want to help you in that arena. We do that basically three ways. The first thing we want you to do is to try to help you have a direct connection with Jesus Christ. We want you to meet him personally. We don't want you to know him through me or through the elders or friends or family. We want you to have a personal interaction experience with the living God. The second thing is that we want you to be in community, because community is a big deal. Your friends, your people you hang out with, influence your life in a dramatic way. So we want you to have friendships and people who are good for you. And finally, what we try to do is we try to connect you to your mission in life. As Jolene, the host, had read a little kind of blurb from the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, where he says, each of you has been or has received a unique gift. So every follower of Christ has received a unique gift. And then he says, employ it in the service of others, manifesting the grace of God. So you have a unique gift, and when you discover what it is, your life makes much more sense. And that's what the ministry fair is all about, is opportunities for you to take that next step in your faith and say, what is it that God has given me and wants to do through me? So now we're in a series now called Weeds in My Garden. It's just an honest discussion about mental health and the things that are going on in our society and what people are having to face. Today we're going to talk about worry, and we're going to talk about anxiety. We're going to dig into that. If you'd like to kind of go deeper on the Bible study portion for the passages that I'm going to read today, then listen to Salty Pastor episode 379. And if you want to go deeper into some of the trends and things and impact on people's lives, listen to Salty Pastor episode 380. And so you can get those on, I don't know, wherever you get podcasts, Spotify, they're on Apple's podcast and other places. If you don't do podcasting, you can go to YouTube, and Salty Pastor has his own channel. You can watch it there. Now, today last week we kind of dug into suicide. This week we're going to talk about worry and anxiety. And the first question is does the Bible have anything to say about it at all? And the question to that is yes. So I'm going to read some passages of Scripture to you and to kind of just describe some of what the Bible has to say. The first one is Psalms chapter 13, verse 2. It says, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? And then there's Psalms 94, 19 that says the following, when my anxious thoughts multiply within me, thy consolations delight my soul. Then there's Psalms 139, verse 23 that says this, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. So there's a lot more passages in Proverbs and other Old Testament places that you can kind of see, but I want to jump over to the New Testament. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7 says, do not be anxious for anything or be anxious for nothing, but through prayer and petition with thanksgiving. Sometimes it's supplication, depending upon the translation that you have. It says, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So that's verse 7. So they'll catch up there in just a second. So it's really interesting that when we turn to Christ in the midst of our anxiety and our worry, he says the peace of God has an opportunity to minister to us. The most famous passage, though, are the words of Christ in Matthew chapter 6. Now, this is a bigger chunk, but I want to read to you what it says. Verse 25, this is from the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is the largest or the longest single discourse of Jesus Christ in the Bible. And it covers Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 6, and Matthew chapter 7. And right in the middle of it, right after the Lord's Prayer, he says this reason I say to you, do not be anxious for your life. Do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat, what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing. Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single cubit to his life's span? Another way to say that is, you can't add a single hour or minute to your life by worrying or being anxious. And why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow, how they do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all of his glory did not clothe himself like one of these. But if God so arrays the grass of the field, which is alive today and is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Do not be anxious then, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? With what shall we clothe ourselves? For all of these things the Gentiles eagerly seek, but your heavenly Father knows that you need these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has trouble of its own. Well, as I said before, if you really want to dig into kind of an exegesis on these passages, listen to Salty Pastor. Just some overarching things that we can immediately take from that is, number one, is that worry and anxiety are real experiences, right? They're real things, and people are experiencing them in a real way. And according to the scriptures, you get the idea that worry and anxiety are negative experiences for you. They interfere with your life in a negative way. They impact your relationships. They impact your productivity or your effectiveness at work. It has a negative impact on your everyday life. One of the ways it's negative in the spiritual is it makes your purpose and direction in life really foggy. You know, it's when you're worried and filled with anxiety, it's really hard to know, why am I here? What's the point and purpose of my life? And so the issue too, I think, as he addresses, is that it's something you can't ignore. You have to face it. So if you want to mature, if you want to grow, you need to face worry and anxiety in your life. And so the ultimate goal of knowing God and growing in faith, in a way, is to build an anxious-free life. He's saying we want you to be free of worry and be free of anxiety. Unfortunately, something is going on in our society that is making that increasingly difficult, right? It's making it harder, and it's increasing worry and anxiety. A few stats just to point this out. There's an organization called the American Depression and Anxiety Association, and they research this. They say 20% of the adult population suffers from an anxiety disorder. So they might just not suffer anxiety, but a disorder, so it can be clinically diagnosed. They also say it is the most common mental disorder in the adult population. Even though it's highly treatable, less than 1/3 of people who have it seek treatment. Okay? And then according to the NIH, National Institute of Health, this is really fascinating. It's getting worse among teenagers. 32% of teens, that's almost 1 in 3, right? 1 in 3 teenagers have an anxiety disorder. And since 2005, it's been growing every 5 years at 20%. So there's something going on in our society that, anxiety for people is more prevalent, and it's getting, harder to deal with and harder to overcome. And there's something in our society that is causing both of those outcomes. Now, before I jump into why that is, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we define exactly what we're talking about. Worry and anxiety are different, but obviously very connected. Worry, psychologists tell us, and I think this is pretty accurate, it's a mental response to an actual situation in your life, okay? So something real going on. Like, let's say you're getting ready to travel, and you're going, oh my goodness, are we gonna get to the airport on time? There's all this traffic. How are we gonna get there? There's a wreck. Oh my goodness, are we gonna? That's a real situation, and you're gonna worry about it, right? But Anxiety is different. You get to the airport on time, and then you're walking through security, and you're walking to the gate, and then suddenly your palms start sweating, and your heart starts beating a little faster, and then, you might get vertigo. I mean, there's all different kinds of physical manifestations of anxiety because you are afraid to fly. See, you have anxiety about flying, and you're like, okay, so anxiety is a visceral response. It's not, worry is in your head. Anxiety is in your whole body, right? And it's usually a response to a situation, this is why they call their triggers, to a non-existent reality. So if you're afraid to fly, you go like, well, why? Have you ever been in a plane crash? No. Well, do you know of anybody ever in a plane crash? No. But planes do fall out of the sky. You're like, well, that safety record is, it's a lot more dangerous to drive your car to the airport than it is to get in that plane. But reason doesn't matter because it's a non-existent thing. So that's how they are different. Now here is how they are connected, and that is excessive worrying leads to anxiety, right? Excessive worrying leads to over-functioning worrying leads to anxiety. Now, why is anxiety increasing in our society, okay? Now, I'm going to use the 4 buckets, and I want to explain why our society is creating more anxiety. And the other reason I want to do this is because I want you to see a simple truth, okay? And the first truth is that anxiety is real and it's growing, and we need to be aware of that. But the other side of it is that when you start to realize what's driving it and pushing it, even on you personally, and it affects you, then it helps you figure out what you can do to address it. And also, if you're helping somebody, it helps you understand how long it's going to take them to have victory over it, okay? So let's dig into this using the 4 buckets. The first one is obviously situational, okay? And situationally, our society has deconstructed all the social norms that created stability for people. One of the biggest things is when you are growing up, right, in a society, stability is a big deal, and it's directly linked to how much anxiety you'll have in your life as an adult. And our society is deconstructing all of the social norms that created stability. For instance, family structure, all right? All research points to the simple fact that kids who are raised by both of their biological parents in a family that had rules and enforced the rules. This is a very important part. They had rules, they enforced the rules. Those kids grow up to be what? The most mentally healthy kids as adults that you can have. So kids, so if you're a teenager, you're in here. If you're in middle school, you're in here today, and you don't like your parents' rules. They have so many rules, and you can't live with all these rules. They're so oppressive, They're giving you a gift. They're giving you 60 years of mental health as an adult. So I want you to give your mom and your dad a big hug today saying thank you for all your rules because they have helped me become a mature and mentally strong adult, okay? Now, here's where people get really unhappy with me, but I always try to tell you the truth. The other thing that has happened in our society that has increased anxiety, there's a direct connection, is the access to drugs and alcohol, particularly for minors. Adults, when they drink too much, their anxiety goes up. When they use drugs, prescription or illegal, their anxiety goes up. But more than anything else, there is a direct correlation between the increase of anxiety among young people growing into their young adult years and the passing of the legalization of marijuana in various states. That's a fact. Can't argue with it. Now, I'm not telling you not to smoke pot. Okay? I never tell you what to do. What I am telling you is that there is a direct correlation towards marijuana use as a teenager and as young adults and severe anxiety and even schizophrenia as an adult. Okay? There's a direct correlation there. So anybody on the internet who's telling you that doesn't exist is lying through their teeth to you. Okay? That's just a fact, right? Here's another thing that our society has deconstructed that is leading to the increased anxiety as adults is our educational philosophy. Now, I mean, there's a lot of little things that I could talk. We could talk about social media, and we could talk about speed limits, and we could talk about this, and we could talk about that. We could talk about all those things, but those things are all symptomatic of these big core ideas, okay? And the educational philosophy has shifted over the last 35 to 40 years. And that is that it used to be in the classroom, all the emphasis was on the student gaining basic academic competencies. It's like, well, you read at this level, you should read at this level. You know how to add and subtract, now you need to know your multiplication tables. And that was the goal. But now the educational philosophy has shifted to how the child or student feels and experiences their own identity as opposed to developing or gaining competencies, right? So there's a lot of research out on this now that says this, and that is that kids, if they don't learn competencies as kids, right? This is why having chores for your kids is such a big deal for parents. Could you do it, parents, more quickly? Yeah. Could you do a better job? Probably. But you need to make your kids do it. Why? Because they're learning to be competent. And the number one thing that creates mental health positive outcomes is a sense of competency. I can take care of myself. I can do it. Just got a conversation today earlier with someone who's like, I just don't understand. My teenager doesn't want to learn to drive the car. This is a new thing. I'm like, are you kidding me? I was screaming to get a driver's license as early as I could. And so we were having this conversation. This is anecdotal, so you can just throw it out if you want. But when I was growing up, I would tell my parents, I want to go to this concert. They go, well, does your bike work? Or get a ride from a friend, because I'm not driving. Well, why don't you drive me? Because I got home from work and had dinner. I'm an adult. I'm not your taxi cab. And so guess what happened? When I turned 14 and a half, I was like reading the How to Drive booklet in New Mexico because I wanted to get my driver's license as soon as possible. But what has happened now is it's changed. And to take us back to this notion that educational philosophy has changed. And that is that the bar is being lowered for kids in competencies, and that does not bode well for adult, anxious-free living, okay? Now, let's talk about the biological bucket. We've been in these 4 buckets the whole time, is that there's some things that impact your level of anxiety as an adult, and here they are. Here's another place I'll probably make some people upset, but that's okay, because be mad at me all day long. I don't really care. Think about the veracity of what's being said so that you can decide for yourself, right? So you can say, does this apply to me or not? And that is your diet. There is a lot of research coming out now. It's just shocking to me. I'm just getting into reading about it. But your gut health, right? And what's happening in your brain are linked. And I'm like, my goodness, I am so excited about new research coming out and all the research they're doing to figure this out. I do know this is that if you raise your kids on popsicles, they're going to struggle with mental health as an adult, right? Okay, so kids, every time your mom or dad makes you eat something green, tells you need to eat a balanced diet, eat that kind of stuff, and you don't like that, they're giving you a gift. They're giving you a gift. They're giving you a gift of a strong body and a strong mind, right? The other issue is that because there's such a prevalence of drugs, we'll go back into this, all the research states that if you're a teenager and you are using drugs, it rewires the chemistry of your brain. That's what it does. When you're an adult, you might be a little slower mentally, but it rewires the chemistry of your brain. Right? When you have to go in and you need to get treated clinically for anxiety, and there's a lot of other things, depression and other things, the first question they ask you is what? Did you have a nice day? That's not the first question they ask you. What are you wearing? What kind of clothes? Have you tested your house for black mold? They don't ask you that. The first question they ask you is, are you on any drugs or alcohol? Because it has such a huge influence on it, okay? The other thing that impacts this is physical activity, especially for young males. When young males are not physically active, whether you realize it or not, your body is designed, particularly as a young male, when the testosterone hits you, to work. It's designed to be physically, you have to use your muscles. It gets the endorphins flowing. It balances your serotonin, dopamine. I can go into all this. I don't want to do all that. Just basically the problem is that if you have a sedentary job and a sedentary life, particularly as a young male, it's the same for young females to some degree, but more prominent for males, is that if you're not physically active and you're not doing stuff, then that impacts your mental health as an adult as well as a kid. So, everybody has different ways of doing it. In our house, we said, we don't care whether you're an athlete or not. You're going to be in a sport. Pick one. You'll be in a sport until you get out of high school, And so, till COVID came, we were right on track with that. Here's another thing that impacts you biologically. This is what's really, you're going to find this interesting. You know what affects you biologically is your sexual activity. There's a lot of research out there shows that teenagers and then even adults that are highly sexual active with multiple partners, body count is a factor. It's huge on your mental health and your relational health as well. I was reading about a young girl named Lila. She's in her late 20s now, and she was saying, I was raised in a Christian home. I was taken to church every Sunday. She said, I started dating this boy when I was 14. She said, when I was 15 years old, after dating for a year, I was talking to him on the phone, and he told me, well, I have these needs, and if you're my girlfriend, you can't meet those needs. We got to break up, and I'm going to move on. And so she said, it was on that phone call, she says, I recall clear as bell, I decided to violate all of my values and all of my convictions. So she slept with this boy. 3 months later, he broke up with her. She said, I then started, when I turned 16, she says, I was in high school. I started drinking heavily. I was using drugs. I was in and out of relationships, sexual relationships, drug relationships with all these different guys. When I graduated from high school 2.5 years later, my parents sat me down. I was supposed to go to Chicago and study fashion. And they said, hey, we don't trust you to go off and make good decisions for yourself. So you can't go. We're not going to pay for that or be a part of that. He said, you can stay here and live at home and go to community college, or you can go off to a Christian college. Well, that summer, she drank so heavily, she got alcohol poisoning and had to go to the hospital and get detoxed. She said, I'm out of here. I can't stand my parents. They're the enemy right now. She says, I'm going to go to Christian college. So she goes to Christian college, and she goes, I lived the exact same way there. I was out drinking stuff. She said, I flunked out of my first semester, all of my classes, and then they kicked me out of school. But before I left and went back, had to go back home. She said, a friend of mine took me to a church in this college town. She said, I went to this church. She goes, I've been going to church my whole life. I know all the songs. I know all the stuff, So I was sitting there, and the pastor stood up and started preaching and started describing my life to me. And he said, at the end of that message, he said, if you need to meet Jesus, the time is now. Go meet Christ. She says, I did. And she realized all of my depression, all of my anxiety, all of my chemical abuse, all of that stuff was all based upon the fact that I had chosen to do that when I was 15 years old. There's all this research out there, my friends, that sex is a whole lot more than sex. It's spiritual, and it has all this stuff going on with your brain, and you have to take that into account, all right? The physiological aspect of sexual activity is proven, okay? So clinical. What about the clinical bucket? Well, one reason why anxiety is increasing, one reason why we have to deal with it, many of us are struggling with it, is because, there is what was known as the formation of neurological pathways. And this is why your biology influences it, situations influence it. You get into a situation of worry, right? Say, are we going to make it on time to the airport because the traffic is so bad? What do you do the next time you have to go to the airport? You leave earlier, right? That's what you do. Easy fix. Okay, you leave earlier. But what happens if you're afraid to fly? And what happens if something could go wrong and you start obsessing on what's going wrong, right? And you're standing in security and you're going, well, somebody here could be a terrorist and they could be sneaking something through, And because TSA doesn't catch everything, They always have that little display out front that says, these are the things that we picked up. And I'm like, well, what did they miss? Not everything's in that box, There's not a nuclear device in that box, so maybe they missed one of those. I don't know. This stuff starts running through your head, doesn't it? And you start thinking, oh, planes do crash, and sometimes mechanics show up, and they didn't get a good night's sleep. And what about my pilot? Was the pilot properly trained, or is he a newbie? Is this his first flight or not? I don't know. Do you ever meet the pilot? I don't even know what they look like. I didn't see them. They don't have pictures of them. They don't have Yelp ratings on them. They don't have any of that kind of stuff. So why in God's name would I want to put myself in this little tube and strap myself to it? I have to wear my best thing. It was careening into the earth. And your palms start to sweat, and your eyes start you get a little tick going, and you get vertigo. These are real experiences because these mind loops get going, and man, people have this palpable visual. What's happening there is a neural pathway in the brain. And no matter how much you want to tell yourself and your spouse or a friend is telling you, be rational, it doesn't matter. In his book, How to Live an Anxious-Free Life by Dr. John Deloney, it's a great little book. I really like what he did in this. And he talks about these neural pathways and how they form in your brain. And he goes, what happens is neural pathways follow when we worry, but if we over-worry, guess what happens? They get paved and they become roads. And he goes, that's why you have anxiety, is because your brain comes to any situation that's even remotely similar to that, it's triggered, and your brain just immediately runs down that emotional neural pathway in your brain. He said, the thing is that if you want to get rid of those, they can change, it's possible change, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. When they want to change a road and turn it into a garden, you know what they do? They have to tear up the asphalt, right? Yeah, but that's only 2 of 20 inches of that road? The asphalt is just the top 2 inches. You know what's underneath it? 18 inches, 20 inches of pit run and 3/4 minus and sand, and they run these gigantic machines over it. They start with sheep feet, just compressing it. And then you got that big fat roller thing, that looks like you make pancakes with, You guys never saw those cartoons? Okay. Those things roll over it. And the other thing they do is they vibrate. They actually vibrate. As their thing, and they throw water on it, man, they water the snot out of it to get all the air out of it because they're just compacting. So they could take 3 feet of material, compact it down to 20 inches, they throw a little asphalt over it, and there you go. You got yourself a road. So you rip up the asphalt, what else have you got to do? You got to get a backhoe in there, and you got to dig up all of that compacted stuff, and that is not easy to do. You got to dig it all out, and you got to bring in new soil to build a new garden. The last thing, and this is one of the biggest reasons why anxiety is growing in our society, is because of the spiritual bucket. Spiritually, our society has become lost. In its attempt to be diverse, it has become nothing. This is called the failure of secularism. I and everybody after me was raised on this notion that you can create a secular society. That is, you should take your faith, your religion, you leave it at home, you go into the public square, which is secular, and we can do societal business in a secular square. That has turned out to be a lie. Because what we found is the only thing that we did is we removed Christian ethics, and now we filled them with all of these other ethics out there that are very destructive to human beings. Secularism is false. It doesn't give anybody the opportunity to answer the most important questions of their lives. You will be an anxious person your whole life if you can't answer a simple question: does life have a point? You'll struggle with anxiety and worry if you can't answer a simple question: is there any point to my life? Is there any reason for my existence? Do I even have a purpose? What's the point of life? One of the biggest questions that philosophers have asked for thousands of years, it started with Aristotle, is he said, why is there something instead of nothing? That's the most profound question you'll ever ask yourself. Why is there a world? Why is there a sun and moon and stars? Why is there air, water, and fish? Why is there a you? Why is there something instead of absolutely nothing? Boy, let that thing ping pong in your brain for a while. You see, these are huge questions. But you know what they do is they ground you in a reality that is stable. And if you've noticed what I've been mentioning over and over again is one of the biggest things for stability, one of the biggest factors is stability in developing an anxious-free life. So you have to understand all of these things. And the reason why I wanted to take the time to do it is because we have learned some things but just by going through these. The first thing we have learned is that I now understand with all this going on why anxiety is the number one mental disorder in America today. I've also learned that no matter how hard as a parent I try, the society is against me in raising mentally strong kids. So what my parents and grandparents had to do worked. I have to do what they did plus more. I really do. You know, I'm gonna have to step it up and I'm gonna have to be involved because I gotta do that. You know, if you just got across the board, you're gonna have more rules, not less. When I was growing up, you know, one of the rules in our house is that you could make no long distance phone calls without permission. You couldn't do that, right? You know, most of you don't, if you're under 40, you don't know this, and that is that they used to charge you when you made a long distance phone call. You paid for it by minute, so you couldn't do that. You couldn't make no long distance phone calls, right? And we had a phone, right? And the phone had this cord on it, right? And it was in the kitchen. And so you had to take all of your phone calls. My parents, you know, we were wealthy because my parents had a phone in their bedroom. So we had 2 phones in the house. So that was a sign of wealth if you had 2 phones. That's a joke. But, you know, it had this cord on it. So guess what? All the conversations with your friends, all the conversations you had were in earshot of who? Your parents. There was no such thing as sliding into anybody's DMs. That did not exist, right? You know? I mean, the only secret message you could send when I was in middle school is the one that you wrote on the piece of paper and then your friend ate after they read it. That was the founding of Snapchat, right? Right? You read it, it disappears. It's gone. Okay? You see that how the world is stacked against you if you are trying to work towards getting over anxiety, okay? But you know what else this tells us? When we know the causes and we know the influences and we know the designs and we all know this, it means beyond a shadow of a doubt, if I know what caused it, I know a way out. Do not believe your society when it says that if you're dealing with anxiety, if you're struggling with worry, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how much you're going to have to reconstruct that road, how deep you have to dig, you're going to realize that at some point you can be free. You can have victory over this. You are not a hopeless case. You are not a worthless individual. You are not someone who lacks value. You are a person that has been created by the living God in a partnership with your parents, co-creators of life. And no matter what your situation has been, no matter where you come from, no matter how many of those things have happened in your life and you've been struggling with, and no matter how much they impact you, the living God who raised Christ from the dead is in the resurrection business. And so he wants to resurrect your life. So that's why I love Matthew so much when Jesus says, he gives us the basic steps to start that process. Notice the first thing he says this: do not be anxious for your life. The first thing he's saying is you got to choose freedom. I was in a conversation with a therapist who, for a long time, 20, 30 years, has been focuses basically on chemical addiction. People who are dealing with drugs, alcoholism, these types of things. And I said, there's so many programs, so many things that are funded. There's so many great things out there. I go, why, when I read about people who go, well, I went to, rehab and I did these 4 programs and it just never helped. I said, why is it? Because you guys are really good at what you do. How come, these people go and go and go and go and it never seems to help them? Is there something wrong with the efficacy of the program or the steps, or is there something new? What does research say? He says, it's really pretty simple. He goes, everything we do only helps people who've made a choice that they want to be free. That's what all addiction counselors tell you. Say, I can counsel you, I can check you into a program, I can detox you, but until you say to yourself, I don't want to be this anymore, I want to be free, none of this is going to work. Jesus is telling us to make a choice. Don't be anxious. Don't settle for an anxious life. Don't treat your anxiety like a pet that you want to keep around. Don't say to yourself, I can never be free. I can't overcome. I'll never have victory. Don't say that. Start with the simple step. I don't want to worry. I don't want to be anxious anymore. Now, there's maybe a lot of work, I know. Maybe, your neural pathways look like a street in New York, right? And you dig that thing up and you dig down all that dirt and impact and 3/4 minus and pit run, and boom, there's a subway down there. Okay, well, we got to dig through the subway, and you keep going in. How many of these are there? You just keep going and going. But eventually, you're going to get all of that cleaned out. And that's why the forgiveness of Christ, the washing and cleansing of Christ, the blood of Christ, why we celebrate communion every week is so powerful in your life, because it does that. It helps purge all that out of your life. But it doesn't happen until you choose freedom. The second thing he says, this is what I like. He says, don't worry about what you eat, what you drink. He says, what you wear. He says, you're much more valuable than food and clothing and all this stuff. Is Jesus just trying to tell us that we'd have anxious-free lives if we have a moderate fashion and we ate a decent diet? Is that what he's trying to tell us? No. Jesus always has something else going on, doesn't he? What's he really telling us? He's saying, I don't know what it is that you worry about that creates anxiety in your life. I don't know what it is that triggers you or the stuff that revolves around the triggers in your life, but I just want you to know this. Clearly identify what they are and start focusing on them. Clearly identify them, focus on them to the point that, hey, I need to resolve them. Now, this is what's really important. There's a research study that just came out of Australia, and that is that they're very concerned about students and their mental health in Australia. So they started this program, say, we're going to do this whole year program. We're going to focus on mental health because we want our kids to be stronger and how to deal with all these issues. They went in there, they launched it. They had like 60,000 students, and at the end of it, you know what they found out? Their mental health was worse. Yeah. They made it worse. And they made it worse because you know why? When you get kids to focus on their problems, guess what happens to their problems? They get worse. They said, maybe if we just coached them to health instead of focus on all the negative stuff all the time. And so they got rid of that program. That's why you need to clearly identify it, not to focus and obsess on it, but just to say, this is what needs to be resolved. Now I need to overcome it. What are the best steps to do that? And then finally, that's why you need to set the right priorities. You got to live for the right things. I love that, verse 33, chapter 6, one of the biggest lines of Jesus, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And all these things shall be added unto you. My friends, as I said earlier, worry, anxiety are a problem. They're real. They need to be addressed. The world is increasing it. We can do things to counter its influence. But in the end, the only path to a truly anxious-free life is to answer the biggest question of all, and that is Jesus the Lord and Savior of my life? Because it's in him and him alone that we have the victory that overcomes the world. John said this. What is the victory that overcomes the world? It is our faith in Jesus Christ. Let's stand for closing prayer. Jesus, it's amazing that anything happens ever without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen.